And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out on YouTube every single week. Champions League final preview time. Just going to kind of go through some interesting things I found researching this game to set the stage. The three things I am looking at in terms of where the game's going to be won or lost, and what needs to happen for both teams to win. So first, what is at stake here other than obviously the Champions League trophy? The first one, of course, is City joining Manchester United as the only English clubs to complete the treble if they win. The second is Pep Guardiola joining Carlo Ancelotti as the only managers to win the Champions League 3 times and to do it with multiple clubs. Which is a really interesting part of this to me. Is that right now Pep is in a group of distinguished managers. But from a Champions League standpoint, Carlo Ancelotti is just kind of above everybody else. And the fact that he did it with 2 different clubs. So that's an opportunity Pep has. He can elevate himself to 3, and he also then has the distinction of doing it not just with Barcelona, but with Manchester City as well. On the Inter side, Inter could become the 8th club overall and 2nd Italian, joining AC Milan, to win the Champions League multiple times. Additionally, they would end a 12-year run of clubs from England, Spain, and Germany, also known as Bayern, winning the Champions League, which is an interesting part of this to me. Obviously, Juventus has gotten to finals, but it's really been that variety of English clubs. Real Madrid, Barcelona, and Bayern, who have actually won. The last team, if I remember correctly, outside of that group is Inter, when they completed the treble under Jose Mourinho. So it could kind of come full circle as Inter being the team to break this little run up of the Premier League teams and La Liga and Bayern. Then we have our interesting facts. The first one, I really kind of couldn't believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. There is not a player on either of these teams that has won the Champions League, which is fascinating. You have Champions League experience in terms of the final, obviously, with plenty of these City guys who were on the team that lost to Chelsea. But actually winning the trophy. Usually you find a guy who's, won it somewhere else, comes from Barcelona to Manchester City or whatever. Or, a guy who stuck around and they won it 6 years ago, something like that. But because nobody in Serie A has won, right? So most of a lot of these Inter guys have come from either longtime Inter players or have come from other Serie A teams where they've spent most of their career in Italy. They don't have a Champions League. And on the City side, a lot of these guys have just kind of stuck around at City, right? City don't do a lot of acquiring players from the Premier League clubs who win Champions League. Your Chelseas, your Uniteds, those kind of clubs. And so you have this group that just nobody's won a Champions League. And then a couple other things I wanted to point out here. Pep, 2-1 in Champions League finals. Obviously that loss coming with Manchester City against Chelsea. Simone Inzaghi, is undefeated in Cup finals. He is 4 for 4 in 2 seasons with Inter. So again, there have been, Cup defeats in there. But getting to the final, first of all, his Cup record is ridiculously good by itself. But getting to finals, he has not lost one. Which is part of my bigger kind of final point I'm going to get to here. But I want to save that for the end. And then finally, I went back and looked at, not that it tells you all that much, but just kind of out of curiosity, Manchester City's track record against Italian clubs under Pep Guardiola. They haven't played one of the knockout rounds of the Champions League. Played a couple in the group stage. I believe it was 3 wins and a draw. But you can't really tell much there anyway. I wanted to see, but because outside of Juventus, the Italian clubs until this season had not been making deep runs in the Champions League for the most part, Pep hasn't come up against them in the knockout stage. So this is going to be a different kind of challenge, and that Inter team that won the Champions League knocked Pep's Barcelona out in the semifinals. Again, I don't take too much from that. Completely different teams. That was a decade plus ago. So those are kind of your interesting factoids. On to the keys to the game, the things I'm looking at. First, it's the Inter wingbacks. It is the core of the system, the way Inzaghi plays, and it is also crucial in terms of trying to defend City. Because playing with that extra defender, if you can get your wingbacks to both be factors in attack and defense, gives you some more flexibility on how to deal with Haaland. It helps you better deal with the runners from City's midfield, aka Gundogan, because you can mark 5 instead of 4, and you don't get pulled apart as quickly. Now the danger is, and where you see the back 3 get exposed, is when that space that is supposed to be occupied by the wingbacks is open, and Jack Grealish all of a sudden pops up there, or Kevin De Bruyne pops up there, and so you're pulling a center back way out, and there are 2 defenders trying to cover the rest of the field instead of 3 if it was a back 4. That's what Inter have to avoid. So the positioning of those wingbacks is going to be huge. If you were playing with 5 defenders, in theory, it gives them the ability to keep City in check. The other part of this is so much of their attack goes through the wingbacks, and the wingbacks don't just push forward, they turn into wingers. How many times have you seen Federico DiMarco hit Denzel Dumfries with a cross? Right? It's the same idea as Liverpool, where you see so many Alexander-Arnold and Robinson connections. It's the exact same thing. When they go forward, they turn, specifically Dumfries, into a winger, where he's got license to not worry about defensive responsibilities. That has to be part of this. You have to create danger in those wide areas. And specifically, because of the way City set up an attack with that 3 and John Stones pushing into midfield, I still firmly believe there is space there. Nobody's been able to exploit it. I thought Real Madrid might, because you can play 3-on-3 with that front 3, but even that didn't work. So maybe it has to be a 4-on-3 kind of thing, or you get somebody coming from you get Nicolo Barella coming from midfield plus one of the wingbacks, or both wingbacks, and then your front 2. I'm not budging from that belief that it's hard to actually make it happen, because City are so good at keeping the ball. But I still believe that space is there. The wingbacks are going to be the ones who kind of open that up and create problems. Because if they aren't getting forward and they aren't hitting on the counter, Inter are going to have a really difficult time in this game. So that's the first thing I'm looking at is, are the Inter wingbacks factors? And if so, is it in a good way or a bad way for Inter? Number 2. I mentioned this briefly, I think, after the semifinals, but I want to revisit it here. Substitutions. Especially in a final, you go look at even this year's FA Cup final, that Champions League final against Chelsea. Most of the time, when City come up against really good opposition in a final, it is not what you kind of associate with City, where they're just blowing you out of the water. Because that's just naturally how finals work. Which makes it more likely than normal this is going to be a really tight game. In which case, there's every chance that it's a tie game or a one-goal game when the subs start coming onto the field. Inter are one of the very few teams in the world, and I'm trying to think of another one off the top of my head because I'm not even sure. I wouldn't necessarily put PSG in this category. Bayern is probably the team I would go to next, who have true difference makers that when you substitute, you're in the same zip code as Manchester City. Right? This is part of Arsenal's problem. And the depth is a little bit better now. But it's not just the first 11. It's the fact that there's no drop-off when Pep makes subs. That is what Inter offer, with the opportunity to bring in, I would assume it's going to be Goossens at wing-back, and I would assume it's going to be Lukaku at striker. And whatever midfielder they end up not using. Inzaghi sets this up so that 60 minutes in, he's subbing wingbacks and he's subbing strikers. And it's a different dynamic you have to deal with, and the drop-off is not significant at all. That is a huge advantage that Inter have in this particular matchup that most teams don't. Is that if teams are making subs at the same time, you're not looking over there going, my goodness, look at how much better these City guys are than the guys Inter are bringing on. They have the depth to hang with City in that sense. And they need it to show. I have a feeling that this game is going to be decided by the substitutes. Somebody is going to step up and make an impact. And the question is, can it be Inter's players? And if Inter are chasing the game when these subs come on, can they be the ones to go kind of change the momentum and get Inter back in the game? Because there's going to be a lot of defending and a lot of just trying to keep City at bay. Or it could kind of be the other part of that, which is you get one opportunity. It's a 1-0 game. It's a 2-1 game. There's one cross that comes in. Can Lukaku bury it? Inter have the kind of quality to take the small opportunities they get and finish them. And the substitutes are going to be a big part of that. Because if City bring on the subs and all of a sudden Riyad Mahrez starts dancing around, you're in trouble. You have got to match the impact of City subs. And Inter are actually set up to do that. The question is, will it happen? And then the third thing, the midfield battle. And I specifically mean it in this sense. Kevin De Bruyne and Ilkay Gundogan have both, in the last month or so, more or less single-handedly won games in which Manchester City weren't spectacular. Or at least gotten something out of that game. I'm thinking De Bruyne in the first leg of the semifinals. I'm thinking Gundogan in the FA Cup. And Gundogan's got other examples too. But they have this knack. And I'm thinking, Kevin De Bruyne, I remember he had a free kick to beat Leicester in a game where there was just nothing happening and neither team had great scoring chances, right? And I remember a long time ago he had a big goal against Chelsea. He just has this knack, both of the players, for pulling out the magic when City need it most. And just being the best player on the field on a day where City weren't great. That cannot happen in this game. That is part one. If one of those two guys is the best player on the field, to me, this is over. The second part is Nicolo Barella, Hakan Çalhanoğlu, Can they be the creative force for Inter? Can they do for Inter what Kevin De Bruyne and Gundogan do for City? Because you're not probably going to get that many chances. Your strikers are not really chance creators for the most part. Can you be the ones to get the ball from back to front quickly and initiate a counter? Can you play that decisive pass to set up Lautaro Martinez or Edin Dzeko or Romelu Lukaku? Can you make the late run into the box and finish the opportunity if a cross from the wingback gets deflected or something like that? Can you hold on to the ball a little bit so that you're not defending for 90 minutes? Both of these things have to happen. They have to stop from getting over. They have to prevent themselves from getting overrun and letting De Bruyne and Gundogan dictate the game. And then they have to actually contribute offensively and be the creative spark for Inter as well. It's a lot of pressure. They're awfully good players too. They can do it. It's just a lot to ask. So that's the third thing I'm looking at is if this midfield battle is tilted one way or another, to me that's going to tell you how the game goes. And then the last part of this, what will it actually take to win? Now, I went with City first because it's less interesting. There are a bazillion different ways City can win this game, obviously. So what I went with was if they win most of the key matchups, maybe even some of the key matchups, right? Midfield, can they keep Inter's wingbacks in check? Can they get Haaland involved? Those are really the three I'm looking at. You know, Haaland versus the Inter center backs, the Inter wingbacks, and midfield. If they are comparable in those areas, they're in a really good spot because that's most of what makes Inter dangerous outside of the two strikers. But if they are comparable in those areas, those strikers are going to be mitigated because Inter aren't going to have the ball and City aren't going to be turning the ball over to kickstart those counters. Because one of the things that you see sometimes when City don't play well is there are turnovers and being sloppy in possession. Inter are a team that can hurt you when you do that. But if City's best players play well, maybe that's even the most simplest way to put this. If City's best players show up and perform pretty well, they don't have to be spectacular, but if they do their jobs, they're going to win this game 8-9 times out of 10. Then you got the Inter side of this. And to me, there are two parts to this. One, the Stars deliver. And two, they minimize the amount of dangerous possession City has. City's going to have possession. That's fine. It doesn't matter. Because there are games, every once in a while, where City have all this possession and don't do much with it. That is what you have to try and achieve. That is why having 5 defenders is going to help. Because if they're just passing the ball around in front of you, it's fine. Now, maybe you still lose because De Bruyne comes up with a moment, or Gundogan comes up with a moment, or Haaland comes up with a moment. But that's your formula. And then you need that creativity, and you need your strikers to hold the ball up, to combine, to be able to take the opportunity when it comes. Because if those two, you don't need them to be, they're not going to be very involved in the game, probably. But if you can keep it under control, keep a clean sheet, keep it to 1 goal, and give yourself a chance, that's what the minimizing the City's dangerous possession is. Just keep yourself in the game. The second part is take the opportunities that you create, which means you got to create the opportunities and then you got to capitalize on them, which goes to the midfield, it goes to the strikers, it goes to the wingbacks. To me, those are the two things that need to happen for Inter, and Inter need both of them. Because if you keep City in check, but you don't take your chances, you're asking for trouble. And even if you score a goal or two, but you don't do your job defensively, you're asking for trouble there too. It's got to be both. Can't be one or the other. The final thing I'm going to say here. I'm not big into predictions, especially in a game like this where anybody picking against City is just trying too hard. There just is no way to say, here is why I think City is going to lose. That doesn't exist. What there is a here. Sorry. Here is why I think Inter have a real chance to win, and this is closer than it looks on paper, and that it's being framed from a narrative standpoint to be. And that's where I am. To me, this is an incredibly competitive game. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One, I already talked about Inzaghi's record in cup finals. It's got to mean something. He knows how to navigate these kind of games. Two, it's the system. This system is something different that City don't see very often. And it is, in many ways, designed to take away some of the things that City do best. Inter are more than comfortable absorbing pressure. And they don't give up goals once they have gone back to this kind of counterattacking 3-5-2. They are excellent defensively. They can absorb pressure and take the sting out of your possession, which is, again, one of the keys I just talked about. The substitutes. The fact that there are 3, 4, 5, 6 Inter players, not all of whom will be in the starting lineup, who can deliver the moment that wins this game or that sends this game to extra time, whatever it might be. They have the individual talent to do this. There are some similarities to that Chelsea team that beat City. Nobody was picking them, but they were great defensively, and they had players who, if the opportunity presented itself, could be, the man of the moment, like Kai Havertz was, and they kept the clean sheet. There are plenty of reasons to sit there and say Inter have a real chance to win, and I really believe that. But you can't get the prediction, again, the prediction thing to me is just kind of silly in a game like this. The question is, what kind of chance do Inter have? And my answer is a much better one than most people are giving them credit for. They are playing so well. They are so deep. They are so good in cups in these one-off games. And they can pose some interesting problems to City from a tactical standpoint. That this is far from a foregone conclusion City are going to win this game. At the same time, of course City are the favorites. That's not the interesting conversation. The interesting conversation is, what are the things that make Inter a dangerous opponent? And there are plenty of them.